Okay, great. I will go ahead and introduce the session. So welcome everybody to Growing Up, Designing with Mass Timber. If you're joining us from the last session, within this embodied carbon track, you just heard about procuring climate smart mass timber and bamboo. In this session, we're going to take that one step further and hear from experts on how to design and build with mass timber and the innovations occurring within mass timber products. If you're looking for AIA credit, the learning objectives for the session are shown here, and we'll follow up with a survey on how to submit your member number for continuing education credit. And you're also welcome to ask your questions through the Q&A feature. If we don't get to all of the questions, we'll ask our presenters to answer those later on. And then we can post the answers on the CarbonPositive website. We'll also be posting the recordings on the CarbonPositive website as well. So with that, it is my pleasure to introduce the speakers for this session. Our first speaker will be Tom Westwood, a senior associate with Waugh Thistleton Architects, who has been with the practice since 2010. Tom has a particular focus on reducing embodied carbon in construction. In the time he's been with Waugh Thistleton Architects, Tom has helped the practice grow in size and ambition, being shortlisted for the Sterling Prize in 2018, and now working on master plans and towers alongside housing and commercial projects. Following Tom will be Alan Dowdall, a structural engineer who leads Ramboll's timber design with a special focus on cross-laminated timber construction. Alan has delivered over 50 timber buildings. He leads the International Timber Network Design Group within Ramboll, which focuses on innovative ideas, research, and knowledge sharing. And with that, I will hand it over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Lindsay. Okay, I hope everyone can see my full screen. Alan, I appreciate you nod if you can. Excellent.
Yes, looks great.
Well, welcome everyone. Very pleased you can join us today, and thank you all for attending this session. It's a great privilege to be part of the reset program with CarbonPositive, an extremely important and timely check-in on progress that the whole industry is making in tackling climate change, which is without doubt one of the most important issues of our time. So who are we? We're Waugh Thistleton Architects. We are big fans of timber, as I hope this practice image demonstrates. We believe, as well as its fantastic contribution towards tackling climate change, it has multiple other benefits, positive benefits for construction, and we certainly try to build in timber whenever we can. So we specialise particularly in mass timber, which Alan will talk a little bit more about some of the different types that he's used, but it's a range of materials that are timber planks or laminates bonded together to make larger structural elements, be they columns, beams, or panels, to enable us to build with timber, but in a very modern way. So I think what I should really start with is why is embodied carbon so important? I think some of you will have heard other talks on this today, but it does form a really key part of why we are so passionate about building in timber. Over the last 20 to 30 years, building codes and building regulations have made great strides towards improving the energy efficiency of buildings as they run. The energy used to heat them, cool them, light them, etc., is reducing all the time, and governments are insisting on that, which is a fantastic thing. At the same time, though, legislation has not really come into place to reduce the amount of energy used to actually build those buildings in the first place. And as buildings become more and more energy efficient to run, proportionally, the amount of energy that goes into building them in the first place becomes more and more significant in terms of their overall carbon footprint. And as this chart demonstrates, we are currently at a stage where the carbon that goes into building a building, the embodied carbon, is roughly speaking as important as the energy used to run it over a typical lifespan. And that will only get more important as buildings continue to become more energy efficient to run, meaning that the embodied carbon actually becomes the dominant factor very, very soon. So why timber? There are, as I say, multiple benefits, but its key attribute is that it grows. It's a miracle material. Most of other building materials we have to mine, we have to process. They take huge amounts of energy to make into building materials that we can actually use on site. Whereas timber, although it obviously takes energy to process it, it has carbon locked into it in the first place. It doesn't take energy to grow it, apart from the energy of our planet, of the sun and the rain. And we produced this cartoon a few years ago to really just try and demonstrate and summarize why timber is such a great material to work with. And it's really this circularity that is so important with timber. Beyond it growing, then when it is processed, most factories and plants that process timber to be used in mass timber products use the offcuts of timber to actually help power the factories themselves. So they're incredibly energy efficient plants and factories. Then you can use timber to build buildings on site. And then at the end of those buildings' lives, obviously we hope they'll last a long time, but if they do become redundant, that timber could then be taken apart again and either burnt to make energy, giving it a second life, or actually reassembled into other buildings. So it's a fantastically energy efficient process in total. So beyond that, working with timber has great benefits for buildings in general. Aside from the fantastic attributes it brings from a sustainability point of view, it tends to be quicker to build with when compared with a concrete building, because you're using prefabricated elements that can be joined together in a more efficient way, quicker on site. It's a lighter material compared to concrete, 80% lighter. So whilst the building itself, once all the other materials are added, won't be 80% lighter, a completed building in CLT rather than concrete tends to weigh perhaps about 70 to 80% in total of the same building in concrete. It's a much more accurate material than concrete in terms of tolerance. So because all the elements are prefabricated, they can go together more tightly, which really improves air tightness and reduces snags and defects on site. Fewer deliveries are required to site compared to a concrete structure. So fewer lorries on the road, less pollution, less noise, less disruption from those lorries. It takes fewer people on site to assemble the building. So again, that makes a safer, quieter, and potentially cheaper workforce on site. And there's fewer components overall. Cross-laminated timber particularly can be used for floors, walls, stairs, lift cores, etc. So it has multiple purposes versus a concrete frame building that then needs different materials added to it to get to the same level of completion. So what is CLT? Some of you will know this, but for those of you who don't know the material so well, it's an incredibly simple material formed of planks of timber, very regularly sized planks, which are spliced together to remove knots and defects, and then glued together in layers at right angles to each other to create large panels. I've talked a little bit about how it's processed, but again, to reiterate that it's the factory process is very energy efficient in itself. So I'm now just going to go through a few projects that we've worked on over the years, and to talk through some of the different sectors, different types of structure used, and how we've experimented and learned from those. Our first major building in mass timber was a block of apartments, 10 stories high, Murray Grove. And what we really looked to investigate in this building was how as many of the elements as possible could be in cross-laminated timber. So all of the internal walls, external walls, roof, floor, stairs, lift core, and that means that each of those elements can be relatively thin, as thin as possible. So that was the real concept behind this project. A few shots of it here under construction, and you can see how all these major elements are in timber, and that means it's incredibly quick to erect. And a few shots of it under construction from inside, so you can see how relatively simple the whole technology is. Very simple to join together basic metal brackets and screws used to join panels, and also very easy to fix into for electricians, plumbers, and other follow-on trades. And an image of the finished building. And I think one important thread I'll talk about over the next few slides is timber is a beautiful material, as well as being very efficient and sustainable. And in the right circumstances, it's great to show it off. But equally, we think it's incredibly important that the world realizes that it's a very normal building material and can be used for everyday buildings all the time, without having to necessarily spend lots of time showing it off. It can be hidden away and still do a fantastic job, particularly for climate change. We then, with our learnings from Murray Grove, worked on a much larger apartment block, which again is a very regular kind of building, the kind of building that everybody needs in the world. And there's absolutely no reason why these can't be in timber, and we certainly proved that with this building. Alan will also touch on this building later, as we worked on that with Ramboll structural engineers. And one of the really key reasons for using timber on this project, and reasons why the client was persuaded to, was because of the lower weight compared to a concrete building. There was a future underground train line under the site, which meant we couldn't use piles. So we had to use a concrete raft, and that limited the total weight of the building. And because the building was in timber rather than concrete, we could build a bigger building. So a great benefit to the client. So this really demonstrates a few of those benefits. So yes, 25% fewer homes could have been built if it were a concrete frame because of the weight. In terms of lorry deliveries, Ramboll helped us analyse this and worked out that there were 78% fewer lorry deliveries to the site compared to a concrete building. And some people are concerned sometimes that if we built everything in timber, would we run out of trees? It's a valid question, but we're an incredibly long way from that. And in terms of the quantum, the trees used to build this building would have only taken 3 hours to grow in the forests in Austria from which these came to build the entire building. So yeah, we're a long way from running out of trees. So we then moved on to look at different sectors, how we could use timber in different sectors, but also in different ways and in combination with different materials. So this is a building which has now recently been completed, a commercial building, 6 stories. We're using metal and timber together. So a very simple concept, and one that I think will help pull people into and persuade them to use timber, perhaps if they want an entry point rather than going straight to a pure timber building. So this is a steel frame, largely steel columns and beams, but then using timber for the floor slabs and the core, and really swapping those out for where people might typically use, say, a rib deck or precast concrete. And again, an image of that showing it's a very straightforward construction, very approachable, very easy to understand. We can also use timber to extend existing buildings, which is also incredibly important in terms of tackling climate change and conserving embodied energy. And so in this project, we both extended an existing concrete frame vertically, but also a large extension at the rear of the building to make a much more modern commercial building. And inside this building, we felt like we did have some opportunities to celebrate the timber, to show it off, to expose it. And if you can do that, it's, again, really fantastic material to work with when you can express joints and bits of construction that really add to the joy of it as a building material. We then also experimented with using it in a factory building. And in this building, the particular sort of system that we used was key. The client and us was very keen to develop a kit of parts, in effect. It's a very regular building, so we built up a kit of beams, columns, and wall and floor elements that could go together to create a very simple construction process. In fact, the whole frame that you see here in the photograph was erected in just 6 weeks on site. And again, in this project, there was a real opportunity to celebrate the timber, to show it off. The client was building this factory for his own business, and so he was keen for it to be as economical as possible. And one way to do that was to have no internal finishes. So the timber is the structure, is the finish. There's no plasterboard, there's no paint. So great savings on time and money in building in this way, on top of the beauty of what you can create. The timber is a warm, rich material, and fantastic to be able to expose it in buildings, and people tend to respond incredibly well to timber finishes. So then briefly to talk about what we've looked at beyond that. Well, I've showed a few projects that are mostly working in the sort of panelized and flat pack approach, but you can also combine these elements with either prefabricated elements, or perhaps create a completely modular, totally prefabricated type of building system. And that's what we've worked with over the last few years in some projects. So this is, again, is a very typical residential apartment block, but in fact is built from timber modules. So very typically sized modules, but built with cross-laminated timber in the factory and fitted out in the same way as other modules. And that gives you all those modular benefits of speed, efficiency, quality control, but also with great advance in sustainability by using timber, and also rigidity is great. And very simply then delivered to site and crane into place. And finally, I just wanted to end with a project that we did, which was a pavilion. And just like this lecture series was really about education and exposure for timber, really trying to demonstrate, particularly to the general public, that you can build in timber, in modern timber. What is mass timber? What is engineered timber? And to get people interested, to get people asking questions, and realizing that that there can be a greener future for the construction industry. And particularly in this project, we wanted to go that final step into the circularity and look at how elements can be reused. Obviously, there's a great risk with the pavilion that it's up for a few months and then gets thrown away, and we were incredibly keen for that not to happen. So these building elements are all flat pack and all bolted together, so they can be simply disassembled and re-erected. And the timber itself, the cross-laminated timber, was made in the UK, again, to test how feasible that was. And so it did have a few other lives. It went to Milan, where it was erected in a different format for a design festival. And then it also went to Madrid for another design festival. So really proving that whilst it may seem like a pipe dream, you can reuse building elements. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you, Tom. And with that, we'll pass it over to Alan.
Hopefully you can tell me if my screen is sharing.
Yes, but not seeing the presentation. Oh, there it is. Yep, you're good.
Okay, great, good. So you've really introduced who I am. I would just say I'm a structural engineer with Ramboll for about 14 years now. And I very quickly, from the start of my career, sort of fell in love with timber and using timber as a material to design with, and try and pretty much focus in that direction for the end of my time with Ramboll. And over that time, I looked at sort of contributing to books to help inform and educate people out there that this is a great material to use, and this is how you go about using it. And within, I suppose, Ramboll, because we kind of really love working with it, we want to sort of hold on to our designs and be able to not only do the design strategy at the early stage of a project, but carry forward our design responsibility into the detailed design. So that's designing all of the nuts and the bolts and the screws that doesn't always happen within our industry, certainly in the UK, and then see that forward through to delivery. And when you do that for quite a prolonged period of time, and nearly 15 years, you really do learn quite a bit, and almost what not to do as well as what to do. And then we're sort of trying to disseminate the knowledge that we always learn into a wider community, and look at what's called a 360 industry engagement, and look at all the stakeholders within our construction industry, and whether that's through training or research or innovations, to try and spread the knowledge of how to go about designing timber, knowing the pros and cons, and being able to use it in the right manner. And so over that history, we've covered nearly over 100 timber buildings worked with. It's quite a significant amount of timber volume and not a lot of floor space that's being created in that, I suppose, is a relatively short period of time. And I suppose, just to echo what Tom said earlier, it's really great to be here, to be able to address the issues that we're currently facing in terms of sustainability and what's going on. I think, you know, timber really can be a part of a solution here, because we all know, there's talks earlier about sequestration in timber and how much carbon can be locked within our buildings, and if we build them out of timber, make them out of storage. And also just being able to compare with different materials within our buildings. And this is something that we're doing quite a lot these days in terms of doing some carbon accounting. What is to help drive the decision process? So what is the carbon intensity, embodied carbon intensity within your building? How different can it be if you were to use a timber element? Even if with it's a lower intensity structure that Tom covered, but also what carbon is it storing within there, and how does that impact your calculations? Quite recently, we're looking at a tall timber building, which would have 10,900 meters cubed of timber. The client asked us, well, how many trees is that? I said, well, okay, we'll have a look. We did some digging, and it's, you know, that volume of timber, you know, is around about 31,000 trees required to fill that timber. Although not all of the tree would go into the CLT in this case. So a third of that would be in the CLT, and the rest of it would be in offcuts and various other bits and pieces. So you could say it's 10,900 meters cubed or trees within in that building. But the great thing is looking at the figures of how quick that grows in terms of the forest, which Tom also touched on. You know, on a good day in Austria, you got a meter cubed a second, which I think is a fantastic statistic. So for that particular building, you know, we got 9 hours for that to completely recover. And the key is it's not millennia like it would be for you know, other materials that you might use in a building. It's days, it's hours, less than days. Which is, I think, a fantastic way to look at it. Then also thinking, well, okay, that's a lot of trees, but is it really? Is it really a lot of trees? If we look at the number of trees just in Austria alone, where most of our timber is going to be coming from, it's barely a blip on the horizon from it. So if this large blue ball here represents the amount of trees within Austria that you can farm, the small dot here is meant to represent the number of trees used for that building. And really, I've made that dot bigger because if it was representative of each other, you wouldn't even see it. So you can look at this in two ways. One is we're actually not using enough trees, not using them effectively. And really, you know, we could do it using more of them within our space. But it's not all about sustainability for our clients in terms of decision making. You know, creating those environments can have a big impact. And using that timber as creating a warm and welcoming serene environment. This is one of our schools from years back, where the atrium space is a nice open place for a bridge deck going across. And again, this is CLT with Glulam. The CLT in this case is screwed into place, so it's not preformed curved CLT. It's just sort of bent into place as you go around and install the balustrade decking. You can see on the other side, it's quite similar. So it's quite a nice, welcoming environment. This is one of our offices in Stockholm, where the central atrium is made up from a mixture of CLT and LVL staircases. The client, it's a really beautiful space. I stood on the side of this before, and feedback from the client is actually when they moved into this building is that more people are using the stairs here than they were in their old building, which didn't have this feature. So it's really encouraging people, because of the beauty of it, to be more active, which I think is also a great little fact. This is a Sutton Primary School, which we completed last year. It's the first passive house school in the UK, probably one of the biggest passive house schools in the building, in the country. I've just been walking around that earlier this week, and the students really do respect the timber. There's a lot of exposed timber on here, and it just sort of adds something to the school that other schools won't have. So you can, with this material, really create a lot of interesting, well-respected, warm and welcoming environments. Again, that's may only be one part of your decision process for the clients. What else will they look at? I think adding value to your schemes. So you recognize this picture from earlier with Tom. We worked with Waugh on the structure of this, and that building did have quite a few constraints in that. If you take the site plan and look at where the tunnels are for underneath, they really are going to constrain on the load that we can do. So A, can't be piled, and B, can't be heavy. So we have a lightweight timber solution that just about doesn't stress the soil enough to impact on the tunnels. We build out of concrete, then we're losing those top floors. And that's 15 flats. So in terms of value, these are in Hackney in London. They're probably to the value of $500,000 today per apartment. But not only that, the design of the timber allowed for extra apartments in the future. So if planning laws changed, and they do, they can build addition on top of that. A similar one with what is here, Dom, the greenhouse. The feedback from the client on that one in terms of the added value when they tried to bring in potential tenants to rent out those office spaces. They look up into this sort of type of area coming through the concrete building, and they can see. They generally tend to go to the client, where do I sign? This is definitely a place that we want to be working on and want to be seen to be working on. So it adds that little value in terms of people who want to use the spaces. But also, looking at the decision-making process of how to get the team working, I think the future of our industry is going to be a different reporting mechanism. I think we're going to end up into actually being able to present lots of data to our clients and take that data and form it into certain applications. This is an example of a project app that we built, taking the time, the program, the costs, and the carbon into account for the project. I've redacted all the costs in this space, so and then being able to give that information to the client so they can pick and choose what one is best for them. So sometimes, timber will come out more expensive, and we want to be able to give them tools. Well, you can still have a sustainable building with timber, but choose where you're going to place that to get the most for your money in terms of carbon. So I am a structural engineer. So let's look at some timber engineering. In terms of what I see as the toolkit, the bits that we're going to form our building out from. I see the gateway into mass timber has been a combination of these. It's LVL, which can form your beams and your columns, or a floor panel. GLT, glue laminated timber, also beam or columns, and CLT, which is also extremely popular to form your panels, whether that's walls or floors. But also combining those elements together to create different structural products to increase spans or increase strength or do long span roofs is also quite interesting then. So you can really have a lot of flexibility in the material to do what you want it to do. So your structural elements. So when you have your structure, then you have to fit it around the building. And in terms of building, there's going to be potentially lots of services. So how do you weave that around say your service zones? So this is a snapshot of the Storenzo office concept that we worked on a few years back, and looking at creating a flexible office space that can integrate the structure with the services without having to go through those beams and that zone to create a space that is flexible and be quite usable. When I think of timber and design, my first thought is, well, how are we going to stitch it together? And I think of that because the impact of your connections on materials on timber is probably more so than concrete or steel. How you stitch it together I'd say is a very important thing to consider from the start. what's your connection philosophy, where I think you can be more forgiving in terms of concrete, where you could add a bit more rebar, or steel where you can add another bolt and it will increase quite a bit. And thinking about those connections can really, for your timber building, impact on the speed of your construction and how much hook time you've got to have with your crane, the number of people you have on site, and ultimately the cost. That's the wrong slide. So thinking, so how those connection types can really, like this one, this is again the greenhouse building, where being clever with our design, we prefabricated the metal end bits that could then just sit on top of each other. So the site bit was just a quick bolt, quick release system almost, and that allowed, that saved about 3 or 4 weeks on site alone, just being able to quickly install all of these columns in place. So generally, when I think about connections, I think about fabricated plates or proprietary products. They're the general two that come up. And if you're going to use fabricated plates, they're usually more cost effective as a unit of material, but they're a lot slower on site. So you will struggle to get them in place at the same speed as your proprietary products. So you have a equation almost to work out. Is your project of a certain size, where if you did fabricated connections, then it's going to take it a lot of time to install, in which case it might increase your costs. Or if it's a proprietary connection, yes, they're more expensive, but because you've got a lot of them and you've got a lot of speed to get through, then it might be more cost effective for you to do it that way. Now, when you think about connections and you expose the timber, you're into a different world game altogether, which is a lot more fun, into how to connect pieces together without making it look like they're actually connected together, and that really can absorb a lot of time to think about stitching it all and how you can hide things in place, and obviously, designing for hidden connections with fire time required for that, and it can be a little bit more expensive as well. But also finishing up on some CSR projects. This was the head of water thing we did in London Design Festival a couple of years back, which was an issue, raising issues on mental health awareness, and that was made purely out of CLT, and we were able to design, and that was erected in about 10 weeks altogether, so it was quite a tight program, as well as looking at how that peer could support it as well. And then the following on year, we did something similar with this project called Talk to Me, made out of Glulam Douglas fir. It's really nice timber. And the picture here is of the artist Stuart Padwick, and he's shaking hands with the London Mayor of London. So that's it from me. Thank you.
Great, thank you, Alan. And with that, I'll invite Tom back so we can do a bit of Q&A.
Hi.
Great, thank you. So Tom, you answered this one within the question window, but I think it'd be good to answer it too in conversation. Can you speak a bit to codes and regulations when it comes to height of timber buildings?
Sure. Well, certainly codes and regulations vary from country to country, and we may well have people from various countries on attending this seminar. So you'd have to know what happened in your particular country, but it's really worth investigating. I think the key things to remember is that mass timber is not the same as timber frame. Some regulations apply to timber frame, sort of stick frame, balloon frame. It's called various different things, but that usually restricts the number of stories you can build to, in the UK, for instance, to say 4 stories. But mass timber, in terms of the regulations that apply to it structurally, it's much more similar to, say, steel or concrete. The difference, I guess, comes in its combustibility, which is another aspect of regulations. And that, to be honest, is changing all the time, I think, as people learn more and more about buildings. But it varies greatly from country to country. So recently in the UK, the fire regulations have become a bit more restrictive after the terrible fire in the Grenfell Tower a few years ago. But for instance, in the States, a couple of years ago, the regulations were completely changed to allow much taller timber buildings in the USA. So it's quite a space of change.
Great. And then a good caveat from there too, unless Alan, you want to add anything, is on fire. We get a lot of questions about fire and fire protection, as well as on acoustics. Do you have any insights from the projects you've done on how you've addressed that?
Yeah, okay. In terms of fire, it's important to realize timber is a combustible material. So within your compartment, say, you will have a level of combustible material, and if your fire is in your structure engages in that fire, then you have slightly increased the amount of combustibility within that compartment. So there are several ways to address that. One is the timber is covered up, like on some of the residential projects you've seen, and it doesn't engage in the fire, in which case it's business as usual. If it is exposed, then you will have to want to demonstrate that it will won't delaminate or it will go out, self-extinguish, so it doesn't continue to burn, especially on the higher risk buildings that are quite tall. So that's the way to. The key bit, I think, is you've got, to be honest, on any building, you have a fire engineer who is involved in the design team and built within that, looking in, their scope is to look in at the detailing of all of the aspects that go forward, not just the strategy, but also how the building is put together. So that's what I'd say about fire. In terms of acoustics, I think was the second part of your question. Timber is a lightweight, strong material. It's great for structures. For acoustics, it's a lightweight, strong material. They don't quite like that. They want a bit of density within or a bit of mass to dampen that sound that comes through floors or walls. So there's a little bit of a contrast there, a fight you have to work with to get to a place where it all works together. And the way to do that is either to isolate it somehow, so that any sort of impact sound is deadened before it can transfer through the timber, or to add some mass in, whether that's some boarding on top of the CLT or screed of some sort. Or your ceilings have got some sort of resilient hangers that isolate that sound from coming through. So there's loads of details to work with in terms of what is the right solution for you.
I would just add to that in terms of the fire, add to what Alan said. So the real principle to remember is, if say you're in your backyard and you're making a fire, if you get some twigs out, kindling, they will burn quite easily. If you get an enormous log, it will not burn very easily. It'll smolder, it'll char. And exactly the same applies to mass timber. It's not small pieces of timber, it's very large pieces of timber, and they burn slowly, they burn predictably. And so you can, in some cases, over-engineer pieces of timber to be larger than they need to be structurally in order that they can burn back and still be standing. And that's quite a common approach.
Great, thank you. We got a question on speed of construction. I know mass timber can also often be a lot faster for construction than steel and concrete. Broadly speaking, what might be the reduction in construction time for a mass timber building versus conventional?
That's a hard question to ask because every building is almost slightly different. I would say some of the bigger ones we've done where it's a CLT panel system. So you've got some of the walls built into the project. The contractors were saving, they're reporting to save about 16 weeks on a year-long program. So that's a significant reduction in time. And obviously their costs for being on site, their overheads and prelims didn't have to apply to that time that they were there. It's quite, yeah, so that's just an example. I think it's probably harder to do that on what generally is for all types of buildings, because there'll be, whether it's residential or commercial, they'll have different types to it, and there could be different scales to it. So it depends really on the scale. I say the bigger the scale of the building, then the more time you're probably going to save on it altogether.
Yeah, and I just add it also really depends. The reality of those time savings depends on the team involved and the knowledge in the team and the experience. Because for some people it's something they haven't used before. It is a new technology to them. and so they may not realize all the savings that you could realize. So it's great to get some advice from people who've worked with mass timber before to realize that the electricians can actually work faster because they're just walking around with a cordless screw gun rather than having to drill into concrete, as a for instance. And so there are lots of added benefits to program if you really understand the material and what's possible.
Great, and I imagine that factors into a lot of early conversations around cost and structural material selection. That kind of segues into another question for you, Alan. The pricing tool and carbon modeling tool you shared, is that something that's factored into the cost side of that? And someone asked as well if that tool is open source.
The tool is a project-specific tool that we've built for that particular project. So it's probably not open source, but it's powered by a Power BI aspect to it. So really, if you're into Power BI, you can easily do it. So it doesn't take that long to learn. I think it's probably going to be these kind of tools that we use are going to be the future of reporting to clients. The program aspect of it is built into the cost side of things. So looking at the carbon and the cost, and that factors in the savings that you would get there as well. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Okay, so we have a couple of questions around embodied carbon. Let's see. Can you speak to a bit of like building life expectancy versus concrete and steel in terms of an embodied carbon standpoint?
In terms of how long will the building last compared to other materials?
Yeah, and I might expand this too to be an end of life discussion as well for the carbon within mass timber products.
Okay, well, for me, I mean, building durability, some of the oldest buildings in the world are timber buildings. I was lucky enough to be in Japan last year, and they've got fantastic timber buildings that are hundreds, thousands of years old. So when you get your detail right for any type of building, it will last you for decades. Sorry, hundreds and hundreds of years, not decades. Really, it's about getting those details correct, keeping it dry, and not letting water come into it, and having when you are building it, having a moisture control plan to get the water away from the building in the construction phase. Those principles, those basic principles, will mean your building is going to last beyond your own lifetime.
Yeah, no, I just add to that. Yeah, most of the materials we've shown, particularly the cross-laminated timber, is meant as a structural material that is not exposed to the elements in the final building. You can work with hardwoods that might slightly change that equation, but typically mass timber is all about structure that's ends up being protected.
Yeah. Great, and of course the carbon sequestration opportunities last for as long as the product is in use. I've heard quite a bit of conversation in North America about designing for deconstruction with mass timber projects. Is that something that you've taken on in any of your projects?
Mass timber projects in America, I think it's certainly a high interest we're seeing from there, and we've certainly teamed up with a few of the architects in that area to enter some competitions and the like. I think we haven't seen it just yet, but I think it's not far off, if I'm honest.
In terms of as well of reusing elements. So yeah, I showed briefly the pavilion project. Obviously, that's it's not a sort of real building in a sense, so I appreciate there's a way to go. But also interestingly, in the factory project that I showed, the client was incredibly keen to be able to adapt the building themselves and build mezzanine structures within their factory. And what's been fantastic to see is they've already done that in various spaces. They've simply ordered more beams from the same supplier, got them delivered, and installed them. So it really proves that the adaptability of those sort of bolted simple connections that Alan was talking about.
Great, thank you. We're right at the 15-minute mark, but I'm going to ask one more quick question. Do you have a go-to resource within the UK, Europe, and broader than that for detailing for mass timber as a whole?
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple of really good books I think that are out there from education purposes about what detailing you should look to do for various different arrangements to it. And I think a good place to start would be some of the the cross laminated timber design and performance aspect of it. That's got a large entry level information to but goes into quite a bit of detail. So I would suggest something. And there's actually just quite a range of books now. I remember when I started out, well over a decade ago, we were struggling to find that level of the resource there. But really, the literature available is growing by the day, from what I can see.
Yeah, I just add to that to say I think there's been a comment in the questions about the book that's available on the ThinkWood website called CLT 100, and it's about UK projects that have been built in CLT. It was commissioned by the American Softwood Lumber Council, but it's about UK projects. So that's a good general resource to see both particular projects and also some principles. And also some of the main manufacturers, KLH, Binderholz, people who make these materials have some fantastic technical booklets as well you can get hold of.
Okay, great. Thank you both. With that, I'm going to go ahead and conclude the session. And thank you, Tom and Alan, for your insight and your expertise on the topic. For our attendees, we're going to take a 1-hour break in sessions in which we'll have 2 30-minute tool demos. And you can see all the tools that are being demoed on the CarbonPositive website agenda page. And then our second set of sessions will commence in just about an hour. So we hope to see you in an hour for future sessions. And with that, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Cheers.